You need first a length of wire cut off of your spool, and with practice you'll figure out how long it needs to be, and it's nice to have a metric on your body to determine how long to make these because you have to cut them over and over again. In my case, I'll pull it from my fingertips about to my shoulder and cut it off with my high tensile wire cutters right about that length. So about from my fingertips back to the opposite shoulder. So take that wire and feed it through the staple that corresponds to your hot wire location and around the fence post. And I like to start with the two sides about even. I'm right-handed. On my right hand, I'm going to bend the wire against the curve of the wire 90 degrees to make a crank handle. And then I'm going to put a little bend in the opposite wire where I want to start my knot up against the post. Then I'm going to cross over these two wires and put a loop in it. And you want to keep your loop a little bit open. Try not to kink the wire. If you kink this high tensile, it breaks really easily at those points. So you want to kind of have a bit of an open loop. And the principle on all of these high tensile wires is generally over, under, over, under. So on this knot, we came over the bitter end wire and then went back under it. So now we need to come over this standing end wire. So I'm going to slide this out and push my crank handle up through behind there and then bring it back down to my kink. Okay. And then now since we've just gone over, under, and we went over, that means we want to go back under the next time we cross a wire. So I'm going to go under here, and I'm holding this end to keep it firm. And first I'm going to take one, what we call a lazy loop. So that's just kind of a big open turn. And then we're going to make 3 tight loops. And this comes with practice. It can be frustrating at first, but you learn how to use your crank handle to steer that wire and keep those loops nice and tight and tidy. I've been looking at them for a long time. So once that's the foundation of your termination knot. Once you've got that formed, the trick with the high tensile wire is to turn your crank handle sideways, 90 degrees to where you were cranking it before. And then when you crank it over that direction, it'll just snap the end of that wire right off, leaving a nice smooth end that's not going to snag on any livestock, catch on anything. And make sure your end of your wire gets back into your scrap bucket. The first step for me is I like all the insulators to be in a nice straight line, even with each other. So I put my side of my palm up against the fence post, and I use my thumb as the location where I'm going to put a bend in it, and that's where my insulator is going to sit. Then I'll bend it back where the two wires are going to cross over and make a bit of a cowboy hat. So you can kind of see that cowboy hat right there. When you look at these typical end strain insulators, there's kind of 2 ways that you could set them up, and there's a right way and a wrong way. And when they're installed, you want the wires inside the insulator to be crossing over each other like this. If the wires are like this in the insulator, then you haven't done it correctly. And it's a little difficult to describe, but it makes sense if you look at it and it's designed that way and it rides nicely that way. So I'm going to put this through the hole, slide it up to my cowboy hat, and this is where you can see that direction is correct. This way would be wrong because the other wire would be through this hole and the wires wouldn't be crossing over inside the insulator. I'm going to flip it back the right direction. I'm going to put my crank handle in this end as well now, put a 90-degree crank. And then I'm going to cross these wires over where I made those kinks to make my cowboy hat or those bends. And I'm going to try to cross it over nice and straight in the middle so that it's pulling from the center of the insulator. Then holding the insulator with my hand to prevent it from rotating, I'm going to make 5 tight wraps on this one. 1, 2, and I'm kind of turning the insulator the opposite direction of my crank. 4, 5. Once you get that done, turn your crank handle 90 degrees and crank it off. Breaks off nice and smooth, and your insulator is ready to go. We're going to demonstrate a figure 8 knot, and a figure 8 knot is a great way to join when you get to the end of your spool of wire, or if you have a break or you need to splice in an additional couple meters. to reach a post that you couldn't get to or something like that. You cut off too much of your wire. So the first step is going to be to put a crank handle in the end of your wire and then form a loop with one of your wires. And again, you don't want to make a kink in it. You want to keep kind of an open loop like that to start off with. Okay, next, you want to grab your other wire and pass it through the loop that you've created, okay? And the critical thing here is that when you pass the second wire through, it needs to be pushing down on the wire, the previous wire, where it crosses the standing end. So if this wire isn't pushing down, pushing that wire against the top of itself, the knot will not work. It's important you come through from the bottom, let's say from the bottom of the loop up, okay? Now put your crank handle in your second wire, okay? And you're gonna make a loop around the standing end of that wire. And same principle applies with most of these knots. We went over top, so first we went under this wire, over that one. So now we're gonna go under to form our second loop. We're gonna go under this wire, form our second loop for our figure 8 over top of that wire. But now you can see that we went under. Now we go back over, so that means we need to go under itself. So it can be a little tricky to think about this knot until you just realize that it always has to go over, under, and then it becomes pretty easy to form it. So feed it back through the loop. So now you've got your 2 loops of your figure 8, and they're gonna pull up against each other. Make sure it's nice and tidy before you tension it. 2 loops, and it's each over itself. So if I can keep it from spinning, you can see how these 2 loops are each over the opposite wire, and then they pull up together, touch each other just like that, okay? And then let's look at what happens to that knot when we strain it up. So you'll see as we strain it up, the knot will start to tighten up. It's okay. But it'll stay nice and tidy. That's good right there. Just lock it on there. That's perfect there, yeah. Okay, so you can see now that we've tensioned the wire, this figure 8 is nice and snug, and it's ready for what I do as the finishing touch. To complete the knot, you'll need another tool like a hammer to put over the knot to hold it, or you can use a pair of fencing pliers to grab a hold of the knot. Either way works just fine. So I'll put my hammer on there, and I'm gonna take these tails and wrap them around the fence wire, and I just continue, I put them off in the opposite direction to one another. It'll make sense if you look at it that it's just a continuation of what the wire was already doing. So I'll take them in opposite directions, and you can see if I balance them against each other, I can kind of get it around there and snug it up. Or you can stick your hammer over top of the knot just to hold it in position, and just put a couple tight loops on it and break that wire off in the same way as we've done with the other knots. Turn the tail perpendicular, crank it over, it'll break right off. You can reset your hammer to the other side, crank it over so you've got a couple of tight loops, and then turn it perpendicular, break it off, and you have a well-finished figure 8 that's quite strong and electrically conductive.